When Victoria Ashford read a teenage girl's love letter aloud to 200 of Connecticut's elite, she thought she was teaching the maid's daughter a lesson about knowing her place. What she didn't know was that buried in her own family's past were secrets that would one day force her to beg that same girl for salvation. The Ashford Estate's south lawn had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. A massive white tent stretched across perfectly manicured grass, crystal chandeliers catching the dying light and scattering it into 1,000 rainbows. A string quartet played Mozart near the rose garden. Ice sculptures shaped like swans were already beginning to weep in the evening warmth. Champagne towers rose like glass mountains on tables draped in cream silk. 200 guests moved through this dreamscape in designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Senators, CEOs, old money families from across Connecticut, all of them glittering and beautiful and utterly out of reach. Isabelle moved among them like a shadow in her simple black server's uniform, carrying trays of champagne flutes, invisible except when someone needed their glass refilled. Her mother, Rosa, worked the other side of the tent, her face carefully neutral despite the exhaustion that lined her features. 23 years Rosa had worked for the Ashfords, 23 years of impeccable service, and tonight she was just another piece of the scenery. Isabelle's hands trembled slightly as she offered champagne to a woman dripping in pearls. The woman took a glass without looking at her, without even a nod of acknowledgement. At 17 years old, Isabelle had lived her entire life on this estate, in a small cottage on the far edge of the property. She knew every inch of these gardens, every corner of that mansion. She'd played in these same spaces as a child while her mother cleaned the rooms above. But tonight, for the first time, she truly understood that she would never belong here. Her eyes kept finding Christopher across the crowd. Christopher Ashford, 19 years old, standing stiff and miserable in his tuxedo next to Meredith Vanderberg. Meredith wore diamonds at her throat and a predatory smile on her lips. Her hand rested possessively on his arm. Just 2 weeks ago, Christopher had held Isabelle under the old oak tree at the edge of the property and promised her everything. "When I turn 20 next month, I get access to my trust fund," he'd whispered against her hair. "We'll leave all of this behind. We'll go anywhere you want. Build our own life. I love you, Isabelle, only you." She'd believed him. God help her, she'd believed every word. They'd been together in secret for 2 years, stolen moments in the library, late-night conversations in the garden, love letters hidden in the space behind a loose brick in the old fountain. Christopher was sensitive and kind, nothing like his cold, status-obsessed mother. He loved art and poetry. He saw Isabelle, really saw her, not as the maid's daughter, but as simply Isabelle, or so she'd thought. Now he stood beside Meredith, looking like a man walking to his execution, and he wouldn't meet Isabelle's eyes. Victoria Ashford took the microphone at exactly 8 o'clock, just as the sunset reached its most spectacular moment. She looked regal in midnight blue silk, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. At 64, she was still beautiful in that sharp, cold way that made people instinctively step back. "Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful evening," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the lawn. "The Ashford family has always valued tradition, legacy, and the preservation of our heritage. Tonight we celebrate not just our history, but our future." She smiled, and something about that smile made Isabelle's stomach drop. "I'm delighted to announce the engagement of my son, Christopher, to the lovely Meredith Vanderberg, uniting 2 of Connecticut's finest families." The applause was immediate and thunderous, champagne glasses raised in toast. Meredith beamed and kissed Christopher's cheek. He stood frozen, his face the color of ash. Isabelle couldn't breathe. The tray in her hands tilted dangerously. A woman next to her steadied it with an annoyed look, took another glass, and moved away. This couldn't be happening. Christopher had promised, he'd promised. "Isabelle, dear, could you come here, please?" Victoria's voice cut through the applause like a knife. She was looking directly at Isabelle, that same cold smile on her face. Every instinct screamed at Isabelle to run, but 200 pairs of eyes had turned in her direction. Rosa's face across the tent registered pure horror. Isabelle's legs moved without conscious thought. She walked toward the center of the tent, toward Victoria, toward Christopher, feeling like she was walking through deep water. Everything seemed slow and distant and utterly surreal. "We need someone to serve the champagne for the engagement toast," Victoria said sweetly as Isabelle approached. Then she pulled something from her clutch purse, Isabelle's letter, the one she'd written to Christopher last week and hidden in their secret spot in the library. The one where she'd poured out her heart, her dreams, her hope for their future together. "Before we toast, I thought everyone might enjoy hearing something charming I found," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "A little love letter, so innocent, so presumptuous." She began to read. "Christopher, you make me feel like I'm not just the maid's daughter. You make me feel worthy of love, worthy of dreams, worthy of a future beyond what I was born into." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people laughed, nervous, uncomfortable laughter. Isabelle's face burned with shame. Victoria continued, each word a knife. "I know your mother will never accept me. I know she thinks I'm beneath you. But love should matter more than bloodline, shouldn't it? When we leave here next month, we can build something real, something that belongs to us." She lowered the letter and looked at Isabelle with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so venomous. "Oh, sweetheart," her voice carried across the silent crowd. "Did you actually believe that? Did you truly think my son would throw away his heritage, his family, his entire future for you?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air like smoke. "You're just the maid's daughter. You'll never be one of us. This isn't a fairy tale, darling. This is real life, where class matters, where breeding matters, where people like you stay exactly where you belong." She turned to Christopher. "Tell her, darling. Tell her it meant nothing." 200 people held their breath. Isabelle looked at Christopher, really looked at him, saw the tears streaming down his face, saw his mouth open and close like a dying fish, saw him looking anywhere but at her. And then she understood. He'd known this was coming. Maybe not the exact moment, maybe not the public reading of her letter, but he'd known his mother would do something, and he'd let it happen. The silence stretched out, excruciating and eternal. Christopher said nothing. He just looked down at his polished shoes. That silence broke something inside Isabelle that would take years to repair. Victoria's smile widened. "Rosa," she called out, spotting Isabelle's mother frozen near the champagne tower. "You're terminated effective immediately. You and your daughter will vacate the property tonight. Security will ensure you take only what belongs to you." She pulled an envelope from her purse and held it out. "Your final wages. Now leave before you embarrass yourselves further." The crowd erupted into whispers. Some people looked uncomfortable, others looked entertained. A photographer from Town and Country magazine snapped pictures of Isabelle's humiliation. Meredith laughed, a bright, crystalline sound. Did she really think a guy like Christopher would end up with the help? She stage whispered to the woman next to her, loud enough for everyone to hear. Isabelle stood there for one more second, looking at Christopher. He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there was worse than hatred or contempt. It was pity and cowardice and relief that it was over. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't defend herself or beg or make a scene. She simply turned around and walked away with her head high and her heart in pieces. Behind her, the string quartet resumed playing. Champagne poured, glasses clinked in celebration. The party went on as if nothing had happened, as if she'd never existed at all. Rosa found her daughter at their cottage 30 minutes later. Security was already there, 2 men in dark suits making sure they didn't steal anything on their way out. They had 2 hours to pack up 23 years of their lives. Isabelle moved through the small rooms in a daze, throwing clothes into garbage bags, grabbing photographs, leaving behind anything that wouldn't fit in Rosa's ancient Toyota. "Mija," Rosa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Isabelle couldn't respond. If she opened her mouth, she would shatter completely. As they were carrying the last bags to the car, a woman in nurse's scrubs appeared at their door. Rosa recognized her. Eleanor Ashford's private nurse. Eleanor was Christopher's grandmother, 91 years old and confined to a wheelchair in the mansion's east wing. "Mrs. Eleanor wants to see you both," the nurse said quietly, glancing nervously at the security guards. Quickly, they followed her through the servants' entrance, up the back stairs to Eleanor's private suite. The old woman sat in her wheelchair by the window, moonlight silvering her white hair. Even in her advanced age, she had the same fierce, sharp eyes as her grandson. She held out an envelope to Rosa with a trembling hand. "Open it when you're safe," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I kept my promise to your mother. Now, keep yours to me." Rosa took the envelope, nodded, and kissed the old woman's hand. They left through the back gate at 10:30 that night. Isabelle didn't look back at the only home she'd ever known. At a motel 20 miles away, they finally opened Eleanor's envelope. Inside was $15,000 in cash and a note written in shaky handwriting, "For what was stolen. It's not enough, but it's what I can do. Make her extraordinary. E.A." Rosa and Isabelle stared at the money, at the note, at each other. Then, finally, Isabelle cried. 3 days after the humiliation, Isabelle stood in the bathroom of their new apartment, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror. The apartment was in a neighborhood where gunshots sometimes punctuated the night, and the hallways smelled like mildew, and something worse neither of them wanted to identify. 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The window in the bedroom didn't close all the way. The kitchen faucet dripped constantly, a maddening rhythm that kept Isabelle awake at night. But it was all they could afford. Rosa had spent the last 3 days calling every wealthy family she knew in Connecticut, looking for work. The responses were all the same. Victoria Ashford had made phone calls too. Rosa Chen was unemployable among the elite. No one wanted to hire a housekeeper who'd been fired for her daughter seducing the master's son. The story had spread like wildfire. Isabelle had seen it herself online. Photographs from the gala, snippets of gossip on social media, her humiliation packaged as entertainment for people who'd never know her name. She heard her mother in the kitchen, trying to fix the dripping faucet with tools from a dollar store. Rosa's hands, which had scrubbed Victoria Ashford's floors for 23 years, fumbled with the cheap wrench. She was crying quietly, trying to hide it from her daughter. Isabelle looked down at the acceptance letter in her hands. Cornell University, full academic scholarship to study architecture. It had arrived 3 months ago, and she'd cried tears of joy when she opened it. Rosa had framed it, hung it on the wall of their cottage, told everyone who would listen that her daughter was going to be an architect. The scholarship covered tuition, nothing else. No housing, no meal plan, no books, no supplies. Isabelle would need at least $15,000 a year just to survive. They'd been planning to use Rosa's savings and her continued salary from the Ashfords. Now they were living on Eleanor's $15,000, and it was disappearing fast. First month's rent, security deposit, food, bus fare for Rosa's job search. They had maybe $8,000 left. Isabelle could get a job, delay college for a year, work full-time, help her mother, rebuild their savings. Go to Cornell next year, or the year after, or maybe never. The thought made something inside her die a little. But what choice did they have? She walked into the kitchen. Rosa looked up from the sink, quickly wiping her eyes. "Mija, I almost have it fixed," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Mom, I'm not going to Cornell." The wrench clattered into the sink. "What? No, no, we need the money. I can work, help with rent, find something." "Absolutely not." Rosa's voice was steel. She crossed the tiny kitchen and gripped her daughter's shoulders. "You listen to me, Isabelle Maria Chen. That woman tried to crush you because she knew you were extraordinary. She saw your power, your potential, your brilliance, and she wanted to destroy it before you realized you had it. Mom, no. You will go to that school. You will work 3 jobs if you have to. You will sleep 4 hours a night. You will do whatever it takes. But you will not let Victoria Ashford win. You will not let her cruelty define your future." Tears streamed down Rosa's face, but her voice never wavered. "You will become everything she said you'd never be. And one day, Miha, one day you'll show them all what they threw away, what they were too blind and cruel and stupid to value. Do you understand me?" Isabelle nodded, unable to speak. "Promise me," Rosa demanded. "Promise me you won't give up on yourself." "I promise," Isabelle whispered. Rosa pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. "Good. Because I didn't raise a quitter, I raised a fighter." So Isabelle went to Cornell. She worked as a library assistant, 20 hours a week, making minimum wage shelving books. She waitressed at a diner every weekend, smelling like grease and coffee, smiling at customers who never tipped enough. She did architectural sketches for local firms, $5 an hour under the table, teaching herself advanced software in the computer lab after midnight. She slept 4 hours a night. She lived on ramen and apples stolen from the dining hall. She wore the same 3 outfits on rotation, bought from Goodwill. While other students went to parties and football games and dated and lived the college experience she'd dreamed about, Isabelle worked and studied and survived. She never told anyone about Christopher, never mentioned the Ashfords, never explained why she flinched when someone got too close or why she never went on dates despite the invitations. Her professors noticed her anyway. She was the student who always sat in front, who asked the sharpest questions, who turned in projects that made them stop and stare. By sophomore year, she was winning design competitions. By junior year, prestigious firms were offering her internships. Rosa found work cleaning office buildings at night. She sent her daughter every spare dollar, despite Isabelle's protests. They talked on the phone every Sunday. Rosa never complained about her aching back or the fact that she was doing the same work she'd done for the Ashfords, just for a fraction of the pay and none of the stability. "I'm proud of you, Miha," she'd say. So proud. They never spoke Christopher's name. They never looked back. Isabelle graduated summa cum laude at 21. The youngest intern ever hired by Morrison & Partners, one of New York's top architectural firms. At 23, she won the AIA Young Architects Award for a sustainable housing project. At 25, she opened her own firm, Chen Architectural Design, specializing in luxury estates and historical restoration. The work consumed her. It was easier than feeling, safer than trusting, more reliable than love. By 29, she'd built something Victoria Ashford never expected and could never take away. She'd built herself. Isabelle's phone buzzed on her desk, pulling her from the memory of those difficult years. A new email from her assistant. Consultation request, historical property in Connecticut. High priority, Ashford Estate. She stared at the screen. After 12 years, the past had finally found her. Isabelle sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise, looking out over the city she'd conquered through sheer force of will. Her office was all clean lines and natural light, architectural models on glass shelves, awards she'd never bothered to hang collecting dust in a drawer. On her desk, hidden in the bottom drawer beneath files and sketches, was a small silver locket, the one Christopher had given her under the oak tree a lifetime ago. She'd never been able to wear it. She'd never been able to throw it away. Now his family's estate was crumbling, and they needed her to save it. The irony was almost beautiful. Isabelle picked up her phone and called the only person whose opinion mattered. "Mum," she said when Rosa answered, "you're not going to believe who just asked for my help." There was a long pause. Then Rosa's voice, steady and strong. "Mija, maybe it's time, not for them, for you, to close that chapter, to show them who you became, not for revenge, but for completion." Isabelle looked out at the city, at everything she'd built from nothing, at the life she'd created from the ashes of that terrible night. "Yeah," she said softly, "maybe it is time." She opened her laptop and began drafting her response. The maid's daughter was coming home. The Ashford Estate looked like a beautiful corpse. Isabelle drove her Tesla up the familiar curved driveway on a crisp October morning, fallen leaves crunching under her tires. The trees she'd climbed as a child had grown massive, their branches creating a cathedral of gold and crimson overhead. The fountain, where she and Christopher used to hide love letters, had long since run dry, its basin filled with dead leaves and stagnant water. And the mansion itself, the mansion broke her heart a little. Shutters hung crooked from their hinges. Paint peeled from the columns like old skin. Several windows on the third floor were cracked, patched with cardboard and tape. The once pristine gardens had become a tangle of weeds and overgrown hedges. The south lawn, where Isabelle had been humiliated, was yellow and patchy, more dirt than grass. 12 years of neglect had taken their toll. Isabelle parked in the circular drive and sat for a moment, gathering herself. She wore a charcoal Armani suit tailored to perfection, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. Minimal jewelry except for the silver watch her mother had given her when she opened her firm. Her portfolio case was Italian leather. Her shoes were Louboutin. She looked successful because she was successful. She'd made sure of that. But her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. Rosa sat in the passenger seat, calm and steady as always. At 58, she was still beautiful, silver threading through her dark hair now, lines around her eyes from years of hard work, but dignified in a way Victoria Ashford could never achieve with all her expensive clothes and cold elegance. "You ready, Mija?" Rosa asked gently. "Are you?" Isabelle countered. Rosa smiled, sad and knowing. "I stopped being afraid of this place a long time ago. The only power it has is what we give it." Isabelle nodded and opened the car door. The front entrance was exactly as she remembered. The same heavy oak doors with brass fixtures now tarnished green. The same stone steps where she'd sat as a child, reading books while her mother worked inside. The same smell of old money and older secrets. She rang the doorbell. Actual chimes echoed inside, discordant and somehow mournful. The door opened. Victoria Ashford stood in the foyer, and for a moment Isabelle didn't recognize her. Victoria had always been thin, but now she looked almost frail. Her hair was completely white, cut in the same elegant style, but somehow diminished. Her clothes were still expensive, a Chanel suit in dove grey, but they hung on her frame like they'd been made for someone else. At 76, Victoria was still imperious, still cold, but the power had leaked out of her somehow. She looked like a queen whose kingdom had crumbled while she wasn't paying attention. Victoria saw Isabelle and froze. Her face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally something that might have been fear. "Ms. Chen," she said, her voice tight, "I didn't realize you would be coming personally. I thought perhaps one of your associates." "Mrs. Ashford." Isabelle extended her hand with cool professionalism. "It's been a long time." Victoria took her hand briefly. Her fingers were ice cold and trembled slightly against Isabelle's. "Yes, well, thank you for coming." Victoria's eyes moved to Rosa, and something flickered across her face. Guilt? Shame? It passed too quickly to name. "Hello, Rosa," Victoria said quietly. "Mrs. Ashford," Rosa replied, her voice perfectly neutral. A figure appeared in the doorway behind Victoria. Christopher. Isabelle had prepared herself for this moment. She'd rehearsed it mentally 100 times during the drive from New York. She thought she was ready. She wasn't. Christopher Ashford, at 31, looked like a man who'd lived a hard life despite every privilege. His dark hair was graying at the temples. Lines creased his forehead and bracketed his mouth. Not laugh lines, but the kind that came from years of stress and unhappiness. He'd lost weight in his face, making his cheekbones sharp and his eyes hollow. But those eyes, they were the same. Dark brown, intelligent, capable of such warmth when he smiled. He wasn't smiling now. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Isabelle," he breathed. You're successful." Isabelle finished for him, keeping her voice pleasant and professional. "Yes, thank you for noticing." He flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Should we begin the assessment?" Isabelle asked, turning back to Victoria. "I have another consultation in Hertford this afternoon, so we should be efficient with our time." It was a lie. She'd cleared her entire day. But she wanted Victoria to know she was in demand, that they were lucky she'd made time for them at all. Victoria nodded stiffly. "Of course. Marcus Bennett, our family attorney, has prepared all the relevant documents. The Historical Society requires—" "I'm familiar with the requirements," Isabelle interrupted smoothly. "I've restored 6 historical properties in the last 3 years, including the Vandermeer Estate in Rhode Island and the Morrison Manor in Massachusetts. Both are now registered national landmarks." She pulled out her iPad and stylus. Rosa retrieved the laser measuring device from her bag and powered it on. "Rosa will be assisting me with the initial assessment," Isabelle said. "She knows this property better than anyone. 23 years of intimate familiarity is invaluable for historical restoration work." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Rosa, the fired housekeeper, was now the expert consultant. Victoria, who'd once ordered her off the property in disgrace, now needed her desperately. "Shall we start with the foundation?" Isabelle asked. For the next 3 hours, Isabelle conducted the most thorough property assessment of her career. She examined every room, every corner, every crack in the plaster and buckle in the floorboards. She took hundreds of photographs and measurements. She asked technical questions about load-bearing walls and original construction methods that Victoria couldn't answer and Christopher could only guess at. Rosa walked beside her daughter, sharing details about the house's history that no blueprint could capture. Where the original servants' quarters had been, how the water damage in the East Wing had started from a roof leak 15 years ago that was never properly repaired. Which rooms had the most historical significance? Victoria and Christopher followed them like nervous guests in their own home. They reached the library, the room where Isabelle and Christopher used to hide from the world, where they'd done homework together and shared their first kiss, where she'd once believed in fairy tales. The leather-bound books were still on the shelves, but many showed water damage. The Persian rug had faded and developed holes. The chandelier hung crooked, several bulbs burned out. Isabelle ran her hand along the damaged wainscoting, feeling the places where the wood had warped and split. "I used to think this was the most beautiful room in the world," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Now I see it was just old. Beauty takes more than age. It takes care, attention, respect." She wasn't talking about the room. Everyone knew it. Christopher made a small, wounded sound. When Isabelle glanced at him, he was staring at her with such raw pain that she had to look away. A woman's voice echoed from the hallway. "Oh, for God's sake, Christopher, where did you put my—" Meredith Vanderberg swept into the library and stopped dead when she saw Isabelle. She'd aged poorly. The diamonds were still there, at her throat, on her fingers, dangling from her ears, but they couldn't hide the bloat in her face or the broken capillaries across her nose. Her designer dress strained across her middle. She held a glass that was definitely not water, and it was barely 11 in the morning. "Well, well," she said, her words slightly slurred. "Look who's back, the help's daughter. How quaint." Isabelle straightened and gave her the coolest professional smile. "Mrs. Ashford, a pleasure." "It's just pathetic, really." Meredith continued, swaying slightly. "You actually came back here? Don't you have any pride?" "Meredith, please," Christopher said quietly, mortified. "What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. She was a joke 12 years ago and I'm the architect who's going to save this estate from collapsing into rubble," Isabelle interrupted calmly. "And you're drunk before lunch, so perhaps we should save the personal commentary for another time." Meredith's face turned purple. She opened her mouth, but Victoria cut her off. "Meredith, go upstairs," Victoria said sharply. Meredith shot Isabelle a look of pure venom, drained her glass and stumbled from the room. An awkward silence descended. "I apologize," Christopher said quietly. Things have been difficult." "That's not my concern," Isabelle said, returning her attention to the damaged walls. "I'm here to assess the property, not to comment on your personal life." The coldness in her voice made him flinch again. They finished the assessment in near silence. As they prepared to leave, a nurse in pale blue scrubs appeared at the top of the main staircase. "Excuse me, Ms. Chen," she called down. "Mrs. Eleanor asked if you might spare a few minutes before you go. She'd very much like to see you." Isabelle looked up at the nurse, surprised. "Eleanor Ashford is still alive? She turned 101 last month," the nurse said. "She's quite frail, but her mind is still sharp. She was very insistent about seeing you." Isabelle glanced at her mother. Rosa nodded slightly. "Of course," Isabelle said, "I'd be honored." They followed the nurse up the grand staircase and down the east wing hallway to Eleanor's suite. The rooms were well maintained, in stark contrast to the rest of the house. Clearly, whatever money the Ashfords had left was going to keep the matriarch comfortable. Eleanor sat in a wheelchair by the window, a blanket across her lap, despite the warmth of the room. Sunlight silvered her white hair and illuminated her face, impossibly lined, impossibly old, but still possessing those fierce, intelligent eyes. When she saw Isabelle, something like relief passed across her features. "Isabelle," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you came. And Rosa. Both of you." Isabelle approached and knelt beside her wheelchair. "Mrs. Eleanor, it's good to see you." Eleanor reached out with a trembling hand and grasped Isabelle's. Her skin was paper-thin, her grip surprisingly strong. "Before I die," she said urgently, her eyes locked on Isabelle's. "You need to know, you and Christopher, you're not—" A violent coughing fit seized her. The nurse rushed over, holding a glass of water to her lips. "I'm sorry," the nurse said to Isabelle. "She gets overexcited. Perhaps it's better if—" "No," Eleanor gasped, still coughing. "They need to know. Christopher isn't—" Another coughing fit, worse than the first. Her whole body convulsed with it. "I really think you should go," the nurse said firmly, supporting Eleanor's frail frame. "She needs to rest. Perhaps tomorrow—" Isabelle stood reluctantly. "Of course. I'm sorry to have upset her." Eleanor reached for her again, desperation in her eyes. "Wait, you have to understand, he's not—" But the coughing overwhelmed her words. Isabelle and Rosa left her there, gasping and reaching, trying to tell them something urgent and terrible that they couldn't understand. That night, Isabelle got the call. Eleanor Ashford had died peacefully in her sleep at 2:47 in the morning. Her final words haunted Isabelle. "You and Christopher. You're not what?" Marcus Bennett's office was exactly what one would expect from a family attorney who'd served old money for a quarter century. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, the faint smell of expensive cigars and older secrets. He was a tall man in his late 50s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that gave nothing away. But when he shook Isabelle's hand, his grip was warm, and something in his eyes suggested he was glad to see her. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "And Mrs. Chen, please sit." Isabelle and Rosa settled into the burgundy leather chairs. Through the window behind Marcus, the Greenfield town square was visible, leaves swirling in an autumn wind. "I was very sorry to hear about Mrs. Eleanor's passing," Isabelle said. "As were we all." Marcus opened a file on his desk. "She was a remarkable woman, sharp until the very end. In fact, she left specific instructions regarding you." Isabelle's pulse quickened. "Me? She had me prepare certain documents some time ago with explicit directions that they be given to you upon her death." He pulled out a sealed manila envelope, Isabelle's name written across it in shaky handwriting she recognized from the note 12 years ago. "She was very clear that you should receive this privately before any other estate business was conducted." He handed Isabelle the envelope. It was thick, heavy with whatever was inside. "Should I?" Isabelle glanced at her mother. "Mrs. Eleanor specified that both of you should read it together," Marcus said. "I'll step out and give you privacy. Take all the time you need." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Isabelle stared at the envelope. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside were legal documents, photographs, and a letter in Eleanor's handwriting. The letter was dated 3 months ago, when she must have known her time was running out. Isabelle began to read, and the world shifted beneath her. "Dear Isabelle, if you're reading this, I've finally gone to join my husband William, and it's time for you to know the truth I've kept hidden for far too long. 30 years ago, my son fell in love with your mother, not the calculated, appropriate match that Victoria represented, but genuine love, the kind that transforms everything it touches. William was already married to Victoria when he met Rosa. It had been an arranged marriage, a merger of families and fortunes, the kind of union our class has always valued above all else. Victoria came from new money, desperate for old prestige. William gave her the Ashford name. She gave him nothing but cold ambition and colder affection. Then Rosa came to work at the estate, and William discovered what love actually felt like. Their affair lasted 2 years. I watched my son come alive in a way he never had with Victoria. He laughed again. He painted again. He became the man I'd always hoped he'd be. When Rosa became pregnant with you, William wanted to leave Victoria. He was prepared to cause a scandal, to walk away from everything. But Victoria discovered the pregnancy first. She threatened to destroy Rosa's family. Her mother was undocumented and would be deported. Her younger siblings would lose their home, their chance at education, everything. Victoria also promised that if word got out that William had impregnated the help, she would destroy his reputation so thoroughly that he'd never work again, never be accepted in society, never be anything but a cautionary tale. Rosa was terrified, not for herself but for her family, for you, for the child she was carrying. She agreed to disappear, but I intervened. I convinced Victoria to let Rosa stay and work at the estate. That way William could at least watch you grow, even if he could never publicly claim you as his daughter. Victoria agreed, but only on one condition. Rosa could never ever tell you the truth. So you grew up on the estate, Isabelle. And William loved you from a distance. He watched you take your first steps in the garden. He listened outside the cottage when Rosa read you bedtime stories. He slipped extra money into Rosa's pay envelope to buy you books and art supplies. He attended every school play and recital, sitting in the back where you wouldn't notice him. He died when you were 7 years old. A heart attack, the doctors said. But I think it was a broken heart. The pain of loving you so deeply and never being able to hold you, to tell you to be your father openly, it destroyed him slowly. Isabelle, you are William Ashford's daughter. Christopher is your half-brother. You share the same father. When Victoria discovered your romantic relationship with Christopher 2 years ago, she knew the truth. She knew you were siblings, but you didn't. Neither did Christopher. She used your ignorance as a weapon. She humiliated you publicly to separate you, yes, but also to protect her secret. If anyone discovered William's affair and your true parentage, it would expose 30 years of lies. It would challenge the inheritance, the legacy, everything Victoria had built her life around. I've enclosed the DNA test results we had done when you were born. Photographs of William holding you as an infant. You can see the love in his eyes, his private journals, where he documented his anguish at not being able to acknowledge you, and the trust fund he established for you before he died, which Victoria has kept frozen all these years. You are an Ashford, Isabelle. You always were. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought I was protecting you from Victoria's cruelty. Now I see I was only prolonging it. Forgive me. Forgive your mother. She did what she thought was right to protect you and her family. And forgive yourself for loving Christopher. You didn't know. How could you have known? Your grandmother, Eleanor Ashford. The letter slipped from Isabelle's numb fingers. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room spun around her. Christopher was her brother, her half-brother. They shared the same father. She'd been in love with her brother. The nausea hit her like a physical blow. She barely made it to the wastebasket before she was sick. Rosa's hands were on her daughter's back, steadying her, and when Isabelle looked up at her mother, Rosa was crying. You knew, Isabelle whispered. Not about Christopher, Rosa said quickly. I swear, Mika, I didn't know you two had feelings for each other until it was too late. And then I tried to warn you, tried to get you to leave before the gala. But you wouldn't listen. I couldn't tell you the truth without breaking my promise to Eleanor, without putting us in danger from Victoria. She knelt beside her daughter, gripping her hands. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if you never knew, you'd be safe from Victoria's vindictiveness. I never imagined you and Christopher would fall in love, never imagined Victoria would use that against you. Isabelle pulled away from her mother, her mind reeling. All those moments with Christopher. The first kiss under the oak tree, the promises they'd made, the future they'd planned. They'd been siblings the whole time. The thing she'd lost, the relationship she'd mourned for 12 years, it had never been real. It had been fundamentally wrong, even if they hadn't known it. Isabelle's hands shook as she picked up the other documents. DNA test results, clear and scientific and undeniable. Photographs of a man she barely remembered, tall, dark-haired, kind-eyed, holding a baby with such tenderness it made her chest ache. Journal entries in careful handwriting. She learned to walk today. I watched from the library window. Rosa doesn't know I was there. God, she has my mother's smile. William Ashford had been her father. He'd loved her, and she'd never known. There was more. Legal documents showing a trust fund in Isabelle's name, established when she was born, currently worth over $3 million. Victoria had been the trustee and had kept it frozen, claiming there was no legitimate heir to receive it. She stole from you, Rosa said quietly, reading over her daughter's shoulder. All these years you had money that was rightfully yours, and she kept it from you. A knock at the door. Marcus Bennett's careful voice. Ms. Chen? I don't mean to rush you, but the Ashfords are waiting in the conference room. They're expecting to discuss the restoration contract. Isabelle looked at her mother. Her mind was chaos, but one thought cut through it with crystal clarity. Victoria Ashford had known everything. She'd known Isabelle was William's daughter. She'd known Christopher and Isabelle were siblings. She'd let them fall in love, then used that love to destroy them publicly while protecting her own secrets. And now she needed Isabelle. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, Isabelle said to Marcus through the door. She stood, straightened her suit, wiped her face, looked at her reflection in the window, pale, shaken, but still standing. What are you going to do? Rosa asked. I'm going to save their estate, Isabelle said, but on my terms. Completely on my terms. When Isabelle walked into the conference room, Victoria and Christopher were seated at the long mahogany table. Marcus took his place at the head. Rosa sat beside her daughter, a quiet anchor. Isabelle laid out the architectural plans she'd drafted, the proposed restoration timeline, the estimated costs. She spoke with cool professionalism about load-bearing walls and historical accuracy and sustainable systems. Victoria listened with barely concealed relief. This was going to work. The estate would be saved. Then Isabelle got to her conditions. "I can restore this property," she said, looking directly at Victoria. "It will take 18 months and significant investment, but I can make it magnificent. Better than it's ever been. It will be my masterpiece." Victoria nodded eagerly. "However, I have 3 non-negotiable conditions." The room tensed. "First, my mother will be hired as the project's historical consultant at a salary of $175,000 for the duration of the restoration. She knows this property better than anyone alive. Her institutional knowledge is invaluable, and she will be treated with absolute respect." Victoria's jaw clenched, but she nodded. "Second, you will provide a formal written apology to my mother for wrongful termination and defamation of character. This letter will acknowledge her 23 years of exemplary service. It will be framed and permanently displayed in the restored servants' wing as part of the historical record of this estate." "That's," Victoria began. "Non-negotiable," Isabelle repeated firmly. "Third, at the project completion gala, and there will be one, because I insist on celebrating my work properly, you will publicly acknowledge that Isabelle Chen, daughter of Rosa Chen, saved your family legacy. You will thank us both by name in front of your entire social circle. The same people who witnessed my humiliation will witness my triumph." Silence filled the room like water. Christopher was staring at Isabelle with something that looked like awe and heartbreak mixed together. Victoria's face had gone white. "You have 24 hours to accept or decline these terms," Isabelle said, standing and gathering her materials. "There are 2 other architects qualified for this type of work. Both are currently booked for the next 4 years. This estate won't survive 4 more winters without intervention. The choice is yours." She walked toward the door, Rosa following. "Wait," Victoria said, her voice tight. "We accept. All of your conditions, we accept." Isabelle turned back, gave her a cold smile. "Excellent. My office will send over the contracts tomorrow. I'll begin work next month." As they left the building, Rosa squeezed her daughter's hand. "That was incredible, Mika," she whispered. But Isabelle felt hollow. Because yes, she'd won this battle. She'd forced Victoria to acknowledge what she'd done, to give them the respect they deserved. But she couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's letter, about Christopher being her brother, about the fact that the love she'd mourned for 12 years had been a lie built on secrets she never could have known. And somewhere, in this mess of truth and lies, there were still pieces missing. Eleanor's dying words echoed in her mind. "You and Christopher. You're not what? What else was there to know?" The restoration began on a cold November morning. Isabelle stood on the south lawn of the Ashford Estate, watching a crew of 20 specialists unload equipment from trucks bearing her company's logo. Structural engineers, historical preservation experts, master craftsmen who understood how to work with materials that hadn't been manufactured in over a century. Rosa stood beside her daughter with her tablet, coordinating the work with the efficiency of a military general. She'd spent the past 3 weeks documenting every detail of the estate's history, interviewing former staff members, digging through county records for original construction plans. Victoria watched from an upstairs window. Isabelle could feel those eyes on her, heavy with resentment and something else she couldn't name. Over the following months, Isabelle threw herself into the work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She was at the estate every day, sometimes sleeping in one of the restored guest rooms rather than driving back to her hotel. She supervised every detail personally: the careful removal of damaged plaster, the restoration of the original crown molding, the painstaking repair of the parquet floors. But she avoided Christopher. It wasn't difficult. He seemed to sense that she needed distance and made himself scarce whenever she was working. Occasionally she'd catch a glimpse of him through a window or hear his voice in another room, and her stomach would twist with a complicated mixture of emotions she didn't want to examine. He was her brother, her half-brother. They shared DNA, a father they'd both loved without fully knowing it. The relationship she'd mourned was built on a foundation of incest, even if they'd been ignorant of the truth. The knowledge made her feel contaminated somehow. Wrong. Rosa watched her daughter struggle with quiet concern. "You should talk to someone, Mika," she said one evening as they reviewed the next day's work schedule. "A therapist. This is too much to process alone." "I'm fine," Isabelle lied. "You're not fine. You barely eat. You don't sleep. You're working yourself to exhaustion." "The work helps," Isabelle said, which was true. When she was focused on beam loads and historical accuracy and sustainable systems, she didn't have to think about Christopher, about her father, about the enormity of what Victoria had stolen from all of them. But some nights, alone in her hotel room, Isabelle would take out the photographs Eleanor had left her. William Ashford holding baby Isabelle, his face radiant with love he couldn't express publicly. William watching 7-year-old Isabelle from a distance at a school play, pride and heartbreak written across his features. She'd had a father who loved her desperately, and she'd never known him. She'd lost him at 7 years old without understanding what she was losing. The grief was enormous and complicated, and 12 years too late. In February, on a particularly brutal winter day, Christopher finally cornered her. Isabelle was alone in the library, examining water damage in the ceiling, when he appeared in the doorway. He looked terrible, thinner than ever, shadows under his eyes like bruises. "Isabelle, please," he said quietly. "I know you don't want to talk to me. I understand why, but I need to say something." "Christopher, I've been in therapy," he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Twice a week since you came back. And things are surfacing. Memories I'd buried. My father, the man I thought was my father, visiting the cottage when I was little, holding a baby. I think it was you. I remember him crying. I remember my mother screaming at him one night, something about that woman's bastard." He ran his hands through his hair, agitated. "I'm starting to remember things that don't make sense. The way my father looked at you sometimes, the way my mother watched you with this strange mixture of hatred and fear. Eleanor taking me aside once and saying something cryptic about family and secrets and how the truth always comes out eventually." Isabelle set down her clipboard, her heart hammering. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if there's something I should know. Something about you and me, about why my mother destroyed you that night." Isabelle looked at him, this man she'd once loved, this stranger who shared her blood, and she couldn't find the words. "Christopher, Her phone rang, shattering the moment. Marcus Bennett's name flashed on the screen. "I have to take this," Isabelle said, grateful for the interruption. "It's the estate attorney." Christopher nodded and left, disappointment evident in the slope of his shoulders. "Marcus, what is it?" Isabelle answered. "Isabelle, can you come to my office? There's been a development, something the construction crew found that you need to see immediately." 20 minutes later, Isabelle was back in Marcus's office. He looked shaken, which was unusual for a man who'd spent decades dealing with the Ashfords' drama. "The crew was working on the foundation in the East Wing," he said. "They discovered a hidden room, literally walled off decades ago. Inside there was a locked metal box with Victoria's initials and the date 1994. He gestured to the box on his desk. It was old, fireproof, the kind people used for important documents. "I had a locksmith open it," Marcus continued. "Given the historical significance of the estate, I was required to catalogue the contents. Isabelle, what I found changes everything." He pulled out a stack of papers, medical records, DNA test results, letters. "There's another sealed document from Eleanor as well," he said. She left instructions that this one should only be opened when the estate is made whole again. The restoration is nearly complete. I believe now is the time. He handed Isabelle Eleanor's second letter with trembling hands. She opened it and began to read, and the world shifted again. My dearest Isabelle, if you're reading this, you know the first truth, that William was your father and Christopher is your half-brother. But there's more, a secret even I didn't discover until I was reviewing Victoria's private papers in preparation for my death. Before Victoria married William, she had a brief affair with a man named David Morrison. He was a corporate executive, ambitious and handsome, and Victoria was young and reckless. When she discovered she was pregnant, David had already ended the relationship and moved to Seattle. He never knew about the child. That child was Christopher. Victoria, terrified of scandal and desperate to secure her position, convinced William the baby was his. They married quickly. William never questioned the timeline, never suspected. Christopher is not William Ashford's biological son. He has no Ashford blood at all. I discovered this while going through Victoria's hidden medical files. She kept prenatal DNA testing from when she was pregnant with Christopher, testing that proves William could not have been the father. She also kept letters from David Morrison from their affair and records of payments she made to a doctor to falsify Christopher's birth records. Isabelle, you are William Ashford's only biological child. You are the true Ashford heir. And more importantly, you and Christopher are not related by blood, not at all. When Victoria discovered your relationship, she knew this truth. She knew you weren't siblings. She knew your love was completely innocent. But she couldn't tell anyone without exposing her own decades of lies. If the world discovered that Christopher wasn't a true Ashford, the inheritance would be challenged, the family name would be questioned, her entire life would collapse. So she destroyed you both to protect her secret. She let you believe you were doing something wrong when you were simply two young people who fell in love. She weaponized your ignorance and used it to inflict maximum pain. I'm sorry I didn't discover this sooner. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you when I saw you that final time. I tried, but my body failed me. You and Christopher are not related. The love you shared was pure. It was Victoria's cruelty that poisoned it. Do with this information what you think is right, but know that you were never wrong. You were never shameful. You were simply victims of a woman's desperate need to hide the truth. I hope you can find peace, my dear. I hope you can forgive yourself for a sin you never committed. With love, your grandmother, Eleanor. The letter fell from Isabelle's hands. Christopher wasn't her brother. He wasn't William's son at all. They had no blood relation whatsoever. The thing she'd been mourning, the relationship she'd thought was fundamentally wrong, it had been innocent, pure, real. Victoria had known. She'd known they weren't related, and she'd destroyed them anyway. Isabelle's hands shook as she picked up the other documents. DNA results showing William was not Christopher's biological father. Prenatal testing Victoria had done secretly, falsified birth records, letters from David Morrison that proved their affair. Marcus had verified everything. He'd even tracked down David Morrison, now 68 years old, living in Seattle with a wife and 3 grown children. David had been shocked to learn he had a son from a brief affair 30 years ago. He was willing to meet Christopher if Christopher wanted, but understood if he didn't. There's more, Marcus said quietly. He pulled out financial documents. Eleanor's will has provisions that become active once the full truth is revealed. She left half of her personal estate to you, Isabelle. She also established that you have a legal claim to William's portion of the family trust, which Victoria has been controlling illegally for years. He looked at her seriously. You're a wealthy woman now. More than that, you have legitimate legal standing to challenge Victoria's control of the entire estate. You could take everything from her if you wanted. Isabelle couldn't speak, couldn't process. Everything she'd believed for the past few months had been rewritten again. She wasn't Christopher's sister. Their love hadn't been wrong. Victoria had known. She'd known. And she'd humiliated Isabelle anyway, destroyed them anyway, all to hide the fact that her perfect Ashford heir was the illegitimate son of a man who'd abandoned her. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. Isabelle thought about Christopher, struggling with recovered memories, trying to understand why his mother had been so vicious. He didn't know yet that the man he thought was his father wasn't. He didn't know his entire identity was built on a lie. "I need to tell him," she said. "He deserves to know the truth." "Are you sure? This will destroy him. Everything he thinks he knows about himself, he's already being destroyed by not knowing," Isabelle interrupted. "The memories are surfacing anyway. He knows something is wrong. Better he hears it from me with compassion than discovers it some other way." Marcus nodded slowly. "And Victoria?" Isabelle looked at the documents, at the evidence of 30 years of lies. She had the power to ruin Victoria now, to expose everything, take the estate, leave her with nothing. The old Isabelle, the 17-year-old girl humiliated in front of 200 people, would have wanted revenge. But she wasn't that girl anymore. "I need time to think," Isabelle said. "The restoration is almost complete. The gala is in 3 weeks. I need to decide what kind of person I want to be before I face her." She gathered the documents carefully, thanked Marcus, and drove back to the estate in a daze. That evening, Isabelle found Christopher in the garden, sitting under the old oak tree where they'd once made promises to each other. The same tree where he'd given her the locket she still couldn't throw away. He looked up when she approached, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Christopher," she said softly, "we need to talk. There's something you need to know about your father, about your mother, about both of us." She sat down beside him under the tree, pulled out Eleanor's letter, and told him everything, and watched his entire world crumble as hers had done months before. Christopher didn't speak for a long time after Isabelle finished. He sat under the oak tree, Eleanor's letter clutched in his shaking hands, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to name. Shock, denial, grief, rage. Something that looked like relief, then guilt for feeling relieved. "I'm not an Ashford," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Everything I am, everything I thought I was, it's a lie. Christopher, my whole life, I've carried this name like it was some sacred trust. The weight of it, the expectations, the legacy. My mother made sure I understood that being an Ashford meant something, that our bloodline, our history, our place in the world, it all mattered more than anything else." He laughed, a broken sound. "And none of it was real. I'm just some guy's kid from a one-night stand. The family disgrace she had to hide by marrying He stopped. "By marrying William. He wasn't even my father. He raised you," Isabelle said gently. "He loved you as his son." "Did he?" Christopher looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Or was I just the obligation he was stuck with while he loved you from a distance? The fake son, while his real daughter grew up in the cottage behind the house?" The pain in his voice cut through her. "I don't know," Isabelle admitted. "I never knew him. I can't answer that." Christopher stood abruptly, pacing. "And my mother. God, my mother knew all of this. She knew we weren't related. She knew our relationship was completely innocent. But she destroyed you anyway. She humiliated you, fired your mother, exiled you both, all to protect the lie that I was legitimate." He turned to face Isabelle. "Do you understand what that means? We lost 12 years because of her paranoia. 12 years, Isabelle. We could have been together this whole time. We could have had a life, a future, everything we planned." "Christopher, stop." He froze at the sharpness in her voice. "We can't go back," Isabelle said firmly. "We're not those kids anymore. I'm not that 17-year-old girl who believed in fairy tales, and you're not that 19-year-old boy who was too afraid to stand up to his mother." "I know, but we're strangers now," she continued, standing to face him. "We've lived completely different lives for 12 years. You don't know me anymore. I don't know you. Whatever we had then, it's gone. It doesn't have to be." He moved closer, desperation in his eyes. "We could start over, we could—" "No." Isabelle stepped back. "Christopher, I forgave you a long time ago for that night. Not for you, for myself. Because holding on to that anger was destroying me. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean we can just pick up where we left off. Why not? We weren't doing anything wrong. We were never related. Our love was real. Our love was real when we were teenagers," Isabelle agreed. "But I'm not in love with you anymore. I haven't been for years. I've built a life without you. I've become someone you don't even know." The devastation on his face was almost unbearable to witness. "I understand you're processing a lot right now," Isabelle said more gently. "Learning your father wasn't your father, that your whole identity was built on lies. But you can't use me as an anchor while you figure yourself out. That's not fair to either of us." Christopher sank back down onto the ground, his head in his hands. "What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to live with knowing my entire life was a lie? You see a therapist. You meet David Morrison if you want to know your biological father. You make peace with the fact that family is more than just blood. William Ashford raised you, even if he wasn't your biological father. That still matters. Does it?" His voice was bitter. "My mother raised me alone," Isabelle said. "She sacrificed everything for me. She loved me fiercely even when the world told her I was a mistake, a scandal, something to be ashamed of. That's real family, Christopher. Not bloodlines or last names or inheritance. Love and sacrifice and choice." He looked up at her. "I loved you. I chose you. That night at the gala, I should have chosen you over my mother's approval. I know that now. I've known it every day for 12 years. "I know," Isabelle said softly. "And maybe if you'd been braver that night, we'd have a different story. But we don't. This is the story we have, and we both need to figure out how to move forward from here." She pulled out her phone and showed him David Morrison's contact information that Marcus had given her. "Your biological father wants to meet you if you're open to it. He has 3 other children, your half-siblings. You have family you've never met. Maybe that's where you should start." Christopher took the information with trembling hands. "What are you going to do? About the inheritance, about Victoria? Marcus said you could take everything from her. You'd be legally entitled." Isabelle had been asking herself the same question for hours. "The completion gala is in 3 weeks," she said. "Your mother will give her public apology and acknowledgement as agreed. After that, I'll decide what comes next." "You could destroy her," Christopher said. "Expose everything. She deserves it after what she did." "Maybe," Isabelle agreed. "But revenge isn't as satisfying as people think. Trust me, I spent years fantasizing about it. In the end, it would make me just like her, someone who uses pain as a weapon. So you're just going to let her get away with it?" "I didn't say that." Isabelle offered him her hand, helped him to his feet. "But whatever I do, it'll be on my terms. Not out of anger or hurt, but from a place of power and choice." They walked back toward the house in silence. At the door, Christopher stopped. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you became everything I always knew you could be. Everything my mother tried to destroy. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to see it through with you. I'm sorry I let her win." "She didn't win," Isabelle said. "Look at this estate. Look at what I've built with my own hands and mind. She needed me to save her legacy. That's not winning, Christopher. That's poetic justice." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "My grandmother would have loved this. Eleanor always hated my mother's cruelty." "Eleanor gave me the truth," Isabelle said. "Even from beyond the grave, she made sure I knew who I really was. That's worth more than any inheritance." Over the next 3 weeks, the restoration reached completion. The Ashford Estate was transformed, the roof repaired, the foundation stabilized, every room restored to glory while incorporating modern sustainable systems that would keep it standing for another century. Isabelle had worked on dozens of projects in her career, but this one was different. Every detail was personal, every choice was deliberate. This wasn't just architecture, it was a statement. The girl they'd tried to erase had not only survived, but had returned to save what they couldn't save themselves. Rosa stood beside her daughter on the final walkthrough, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the restored servants' wing. There, in a place of honor, was the framed letter from Victoria, the formal apology acknowledging Rosa Chen's 23 years of exemplary service and the injustice of her termination. "She actually did it," Rosa whispered. "She actually apologized." "In writing and soon in public," Isabelle confirmed. Those were the terms. Victoria had aged visibly over the months of restoration. The stress of watching Isabelle work, of knowing the secrets she now held, of understanding that her entire carefully constructed life rested in Isabelle's hands, it had taken its toll. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Christopher had met David Morrison. It had been awkward and emotional, but he'd also met his 3 half-siblings, who'd welcomed him with surprising warmth. He was starting therapy 3 times a week, working through decades of manipulation and lies. He'd filed for divorce from Meredith, who'd checked into a rehabilitation facility. He was building a new life, and for the first time in years, he looked like he might actually find peace. The night before the gala, Isabelle stood alone in the library, the room where she and Christopher had once hidden from the world, where they'd shared their first kiss, where she'd once believed in happy endings. The room was beautiful now. The damaged books had been professionally restored, the water damage repaired, the chandelier gleaming. Everything was perfect, but Isabelle felt nothing looking at it. No nostalgia, no longing, no pain. She'd let go of this place and what it represented. She'd let go of the girl who'd been destroyed here. Tomorrow she would stand in front of 300 people and accept Victoria's public acknowledgement. She would demonstrate to everyone who'd witnessed her humiliation that she'd not only survived, but thrived. And then she would walk away from this place forever. Because the ultimate power wasn't in revenge or inheritance or proving anything to anyone. The ultimate power was in no longer needing any of it. Isabelle's phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "Are you ready for tomorrow, Mika?" She looked around the restored library one last time, then walked out without looking back. "Yes," she typed, "I'm ready." The completion gala was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a perfect May evening. Isabelle arrived at the estate at 5, giving herself time to walk the grounds one final time before the guests arrived. The south lawn, where she'd been humiliated 12 years ago, had been transformed. Lush green grass, gardens in full bloom, the fountain running clear for the first time in over a decade. 300 invitations had been sent, 300 acceptances received. The same social circle that had witnessed her destruction would now witness something else entirely. Rosa met her daughter in the foyer, elegant in a midnight blue gown Isabelle had bought her. At 60, she was radiant, finally free from decades of servitude and shame, finally able to stand tall in spaces that had once demanded her invisibility. "You look beautiful, Mika," Rosa said, adjusting the collar of Isabelle's emerald silk dress. "So do you, Mum." Marcus Bennett appeared, looking distinguished in his tuxedo. "The guests are beginning to arrive. Victoria asked if she could speak with you both privately before the ceremony begins. She's in the library." Isabelle and Rosa exchanged glances, then followed him. Victoria stood by the window, backlit by the setting sun. She wore champagne-colored lace, pearls at her throat, her white hair swept up elegantly. She looked every inch the grand dame of Connecticut society, but her hands trembled as she turned to face them. Christopher stood beside his mother, a silent support. He'd cut his hair, looked healthier than he had in months. He gave Isabelle a small, sad smile. "Isabelle, Rosa." Victoria's voice was tight but controlled. Before we go out there, I wanted to say something privately. She took a breath, and for the first time since Isabelle had known her, Victoria Ashford looked vulnerable. I've spent 30 years building my life on lies, she said. Lies about Christopher's paternity, lies about William's affair, lies about who deserved to be called an Ashford. I told myself I was protecting my family, preserving our legacy. But really I was just protecting myself from the humiliation of the truth. Her eyes met Isabelle's, and for the first time, genuine remorse flickered there. When I discovered your relationship with Christopher, I knew you weren't related. I knew your love was innocent, but I was terrified that if your connection came to light, people would start asking questions. They'd dig into family history. They'd discover that Christopher wasn't William's son, that I'd been lying for decades, that everything I'd built was a house of cards. So you destroyed us to protect your secret, Isabelle said quietly. Yes, no defensiveness, no justification, just acknowledgement. I convinced myself you were a threat, that you were trying to take what wasn't yours. But the truth is, you were William's daughter. You had more right to the Ashford name than anyone. And I punished you for existing. Victoria's voice cracked. I punished you for being loved by the one person who never loved me, for being real when everything about my life was fake. And I'm sorrier than you'll ever know. She pulled out an envelope and handed it to Rosa. This is the deed to the cottage where you lived for 23 years. It's yours now, free and clear. It's the least I can do. Rosa took it with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. Victoria turned to Isabelle. And this is the access information for William's trust fund. $3.7 million. It's yours, it was always yours. I had no right to keep it from you. She handed Isabelle the documents, then stepped back. I know this doesn't undo what I did. I know a public apology tonight won't erase 12 years of pain, but I'm hoping it's a start. I'm hoping you can find some peace in knowing that you won. Not because you destroyed me, though God knows you could have, but because you became everything I tried to prevent you from becoming. She paused. You became extraordinary despite me, and that's the greatest defeat I could ever suffer. The room was silent except for Rosa's quiet crying. Christopher spoke for the first time. I told her everything, about the DNA tests, about David Morrison, about all of it. We're going to establish the estate as a public trust, transfer control to a board, make it into something that actually serves the community instead of just one family's vanity. And I'm stepping away from the Ashford name entirely, he continued, legally changing it to Morrison, meeting my biological father, my half-siblings, starting over. He looked at Isabelle. You were right. Family is about choice and love, not bloodlines. I'm choosing to build something real for the first time in my life. Isabelle didn't know what to say. She'd come here prepared for battle, and instead found something uncomfortably close to surrender. The guests are arriving, Marcus said gently from the doorway. It's time. They walked out to the terrace together, the four of them who knew the truth, and Marcus who'd kept the secrets for so long. The lawn was filled with Connecticut's elite, all glittering and beautiful in the golden hour light. Isabelle recognized faces from 12 years ago. Some had laughed at her humiliation. Others had looked away in discomfort. All had let it happen. Now they applauded politely as Victoria took the microphone. Thank you all for coming to celebrate the restoration of the Ashford Estate, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. This house has stood for over a century as a symbol of legacy and tradition. But tonight, I want to talk about a different kind of legacy. She paused, gathering herself. 12 years ago, at a gathering much like this one, I committed an act of terrible cruelty. I publicly humiliated a young woman named Isabelle Chen and her mother Rosa, who had worked faithfully for this family for 23 years. I said things that were beneath contempt, motivated by my own fear and insecurity. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Many remembered. I told Isabelle she was just the maid's daughter, that she would never be one of us, that she should know her place. Victoria's voice strengthened. I was wrong. Isabelle Chen became one of the finest architects of her generation. She built an internationally recognized firm through brilliance and hard work. And when this estate was crumbling, when my family had nowhere else to turn, she saved us. She turned to look at Isabelle directly. The woman I called unworthy became the only person capable of preserving what I nearly destroyed through my own cruelty and pride. Isabelle Chen and her mother Rosa Chen saved the Ashford legacy, and they did it with more grace and dignity than I ever showed them. Victoria's voice broke slightly. I apologize. Publicly, as you both deserve. My cruelty said everything about my character, and nothing about yours. Thank you for being better than I was. Thank you for saving what I didn't deserve to keep. The applause started slowly, then built. Some people were crying, others looked genuinely moved. Then Victoria did something Isabelle didn't expect. She stepped aside and gestured for Isabelle to take the microphone. Isabelle walked forward, Rosa beside her, and looked out at 300 faces. 12 years ago, I stood in this garden and was told I would never be good enough, she began. That my background made me unworthy. That people like me should know our place. Silence. Everyone remembered. That woman was partially right. I didn't belong here. Not because of my birth, but because I was always meant to build something bigger than I could have imagined as a 17-year-old girl desperate for acceptance. She looked at Rosa, took her mother's hand. My mother worked in this house for 23 years. She cleaned floors, served meals, and was treated as invisible by people who couldn't function without her labor. But she never let that diminish her. She taught me that dignity isn't granted by others. It's something you carry inside yourself. That worth isn't about where you come from, but what you create with your life. Isabelle's voice strengthened. I didn't become successful to prove anyone wrong. I became successful because I refused to let cruelty define me. Every building I've designed, every award I've won, every life I've touched through my work, it's built on the foundation of my mother's strength and sacrifice. She turned to face Rosa fully. Mom, this isn't my triumph, it's ours. Every achievement, every success, it exists because you loved me enough to fight for my future, even when the world tried to steal it. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. When it finally quieted, Isabelle delivered her final words. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove they're worthy of the room they're in. I realized I was always worthy. I was just in the wrong room. So I built my own. She stepped away from the microphone, Rosa crying beside her, and walked through the crowd toward the exit. Behind her, the party continued, but she was already gone. 18 months later, Isabelle stood in her firm's new Los Angeles office, looking out over the city. Chen Architectural Design had expanded to 3 cities, 22 employees, and a waiting list of clients that stretched 2 years. The Ashford Estate restoration had won the National Trust for Historic Preservation's highest honor. She'd been featured on the cover of Architectural Digest with the headline, Isabelle Chen, Building Legacies on Her Own Terms. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel Park, the structural engineer she'd been dating for 6 months. Kind, funny, brilliant, completely uninterested in her past drama. He made her laugh. He made her feel safe. He was teaching her to trust again. Dinner tonight? There's a new sushi place I want to try. Isabelle smiled and typed back, Perfect. Pick me up at 7. Rosa had retired to the cottage Victoria had given her, the same cottage where they'd lived when Isabelle was a child, now fully hers. She'd started dating Margaret, Eleanor's former nurse, and they were planning a trip to Portugal in the fall. Christopher had legally changed his name to Christopher Morrison. He'd built a relationship with David Morrison and his 3 half-siblings, who'd welcomed him warmly into their family. He'd gone back to painting, opened a small gallery, and seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. He'd sent Isabelle a painting last month, a girl sitting under an oak tree reading a book completely at peace. A note attached, remembering who we were before we learned to be afraid. Thank you for everything. I hope you found your peace too. She'd hung it in her office. Victoria lived quietly in a small wing of the estate, which was now run as a public trust and educational foundation. She'd lost her social power when the truth about Christopher's parentage had spread quietly through her circles. But she volunteered at a domestic workers' advocacy organization, trying in small ways to repair some of the harm she'd caused. Isabelle had decided not to pursue legal action against her. Not because Victoria deserved mercy, but because Isabelle didn't need revenge anymore. Victoria had lost everything that mattered to her: power, respect, control. That was consequence enough. The trust fund William had left her was invested in scholarships for underprivileged architecture students. The William Ashford Memorial Scholarship had already helped 15 young people pursue their dreams. Her father had loved her from a distance his entire life. Now his love was helping others build futures he would have been proud of. Isabelle looked at her reflection in the office window. 31 years old, successful, healing, learning to be happy again. The girl who'd been destroyed at 17 had become a woman who built beautiful things from broken foundations. That was the legacy that mattered. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Chen, your 3 o'clock is here. The Ashford Estate project?" "Send them in," Isabelle said, turning from the window with a smile. She had buildings to design, legacies to create, a future to build. The past had finally, blessedly, let her go. And she'd let it go too. If this story touched you, please share, comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories.